we'll make it official. So, hello, everyone. Hope you had a good spring break. Um, oh, I'm sorry about, yeah, but thanks for telling me. Um, the spring break thing, some of you got caught up on work. That was good. I clearly did not grade, so sorry. But I was catching up on my other job. Dang it, I know. Always behind on something. So I will be grading for your class tomorrow, and I should be able to get everything caught up tomorrow because I've set aside the whole day for you. I'm super excited about an entire day of grading, but it'll be fine, and I'll get caught up. So apologies for being a little behind. Hopefully you are caught up. And then I know a couple of people like, are you going to curve the quizzes or not? It's like, I don't know. I'll decide tomorrow, but I promise I'll let you know. Um, what I'll look for really is kind of what the average grade is. For me, if the average grade's about 70, I'm happy. For you, I know that's not the case. so I'll look at that, and I'll also kind of look at, for the people who did it when they were supposed to versus people who did it maybe a little later, if there's a big difference, that sort of thing. And also, if you're one of those people like your weekly questions are really good, but quizzes are kind of when we get closer to the end, I'll take that into consideration. I wouldn't change like a whole curve, especially if that was just your thing. Bad quiz grades, but good weekly questions. I am going to be more concerned about your weekly questions than your quizzes. So if your quizzes are bad, but your weekly questions are good, I mean, you'll at least pass. That's sort of what I think should happen. All right, and then I had people asking about the book review. And if you have a question, like individual question, like, should I read this book? What should I do about that book? Just let me know. Somebody asked me in an earlier class if I'd recommend a certain book about a certain thing. There was fewer than 200 pages. It's like, I'll try. But historians don't do that as a rule. They like to write a lot. So I'll try. But I don't know if I can get you on the fewer than 200 pages requirement. So we'll try that. Let's see, what else do we want to say? That's probably it. All right, unless you guys have questions. Do you guys have questions, concerns, problems? Samantha has cloned herself so she could get in the room. That's a good job. All right, reminder, some stuff, weekly questions. Question. All right, so your weekly question is small. Let me make it bigger. All right, you are, oh yeah, this is factory question for you guys. We'll talk more about it on Thursday, so don't be distressed. But if you're one of those people like, no, I got to start now, it's really easy to find in the textbook, really easy to find. So I'll tell you where to look. I'll tell you now if you want to know. So look at page 340. And if you go up to where they have the Voices of Freedom section, which is like 347, I think it was. So 340 to 347, really helpful on the weekly question. But we'll definitely talk about it more next time than we will this time because it's kind of toward the middle of the end of the chapter. But here is the question, page 340 to 347 in the textbook. Explain the shift, that shift from artisan to factory work. So artisans like you make one thing by yourself and it's kind of crafty. It's like Etsy. Yeah, it's Etsy. To factory work, that's more like Amazon. See what I'm saying there? It's the best I can do for modern analogy. And discuss the factory system. What were the advantages and disadvantages? Who was left out? Who benefited? What were some ways in which workers responded? And that you'll probably talk about them wanting better wages or forming a union or picketing or whatever it is they did. Okay, so this is really a big the beginning of a big economic change from everybody working at home to people going to work. Yeah, before this, there was just like now where you stay at home and go to school, only without the computer. I don't know how you would have done it. But people worked out of their houses and then they start going to work. And weird things start to matter, like what time it is. Yeah, so there you go. All right, so that's weekly question. I also wanted to mention to you that in the, what is that thing called? Course documents page. Yes, the course documents page. I don't know if I really have to press stop sharing, if I can just switch the document. Cerna. Okay. In the course documents page, there are weekly, or there's chapter resources. And just on the off chance you've never looked at these, I thought I would put one in there. Oh my gosh, it turned into two pages and got really big. All right, so it's like a chapter outline. It's not like a chapter outline. It actually is a chapter outline, but you have the chapter summary, which is short. Okay, like me. And then you have the chapter outline, which goes in order and, just it's an outline, but it could be helpful. It's not going to be painful. It'll remind you of some of the detail in the chapter. And then at the end, it'll have some resources, questions. If you guys want to talk on your own, like just call each other up. It's like, let's discuss how Americans' understanding of freedom was changing to include economics during the 1830s and 40s. And if you didn't get enough of this information in your book and from your lecture, this will tell you some online sources. You can rent a movie. Have you seen Gangs of New York? Oh my gosh. I have not seen it. My husband watched it one time, at least one time. He kind of liked to watch movies over and over. I can watch about 10 minutes of a movie and then it's like, there's a squirrel. So yeah. But I watched the beginning of this thing, and I think it's the beginning, and people are hacking each other to death out in a square. And it's like, no, I can't watch that. So it's rough. It's terrible. Don't watch it. Okay. I did read Little Women at one point. The Lowell Offering, I haven't seen anything about that. So I should look online. Second Great Awakening, these things we'll talk about next time. Okay. Oh, and this would be exciting for you. A lengthy essay on the Second Great Awakening. That's probably something you'd really enjoy. You never know. But then it also has books. So if you're looking for something for the book review and you think, I'd really like to read something about the mill system, here you go. The Lowell Offerings, Writings by New England Mill Women. Or maybe you're really interested in the Transcendentalists. That would make your English teacher happy. They love those people. So there you go. But there's books that they suggest in there as well. So just on the off chance. All right. Let's talk about stuff. You ready? I know you're ready. All right. My notes, which I discovered are a little light on the mill system and the religious revival. So I'll add some of that stuff before I see you next time. Tomorrow during the I've Got to Grade Day. Apparently it's the I've Got to Grade and Fix the Notes Day. All right. So chapter 9, market revolution. So what we have here is a change, a big change, or a shift, as you will, or as we will, in the economy from working at the house to working in a place, and from barter to market economy. So you remember barter system. I'm sure you participated in this when you were a child. You would trade something for something else. Like I've got some carrots and you've got some tomatoes, so I'd rather have tomatoes, like school lunch or something. So you're trading with each other. In the high school, it's like I'm really good at physics and you're really good at writing, so I'll do your physics homework and you'll write my paper. Stop doing that, by the way, because you need to be good at all the stuff. Don't do that anymore. But then you change to a market economy where it's like, I'll give you $10 if you write my paper. Don't do that either. And that happens sometimes in college. It's crazy. Don't do that. I'm just saying, because you need to write the paper. It's good practice for you. But when you get paid for stuff and you actually earn money and you get wages, that's when we're moving into a market economy. So rather than making stuff so you can trade it for other stuff, you make money and then you use the money to buy other stuff. Okay? Market economy. So this is the big change, and it's a global change that's going on. It happens a little faster in more urban areas because it's harder to make. I don't mean you can't make stuff in urban areas. People did work in their apartments or their whatever you would have called it. It wouldn't have been a house most likely if they were poor. But you can work at your house and make stuff, but this is where they're starting a factory system where you go to a place to make stuff. So you don't make the cloth by hand at your house, or you don't make the furniture like you make the table and the chairs. You go to a factory where you make all the table legs and somebody else makes all the chair legs and somebody else makes the back of the chair, and you know what I'm saying. All right. And then somebody assembles it. All right. So why are we changing? Well, people are moving to cities, so you got urbanization, and we're inventing machinery and other technologies that make it easier to have a factory system where you can make all the stuff in the same place. So important inventions like the cotton gin, and you're going like, cotton gin? What the heck is that? And why does that matter? Because that's not in anybody's factory. You're right. We don't put the cotton gin in anybody's factory. That'd be weird. Cotton gin is like a giant shaking box, and it probably during this era would have a steam engine. And you put the cotton, like the kind of cotton that grows in Texas, in West Texas. It's really small. When I taught in person, gosh, it's probably in my garage somewhere, which scares me. But I had a little example of cotton because one of my students went to West Texas and stole some cotton from somebody's farm and brought it back. It's like, we stopped along the side of the road so I could steal this cotton for you. It's like, oh dear Lord. But at least they didn't get shot or anything. Could happen in West Texas. Shoot, it could happen in Cedar Park. You know I'm telling the truth. Everybody in Texas has guns except me. So, okay. But the kind of cotton we grow, short staple cotton, the boll, B-O-L-L of cotton is really small. It's like the size of a cotton ball, and it grows in a really tight seed pod. It looks like a little scratchy thing. And to take that out, you cut up your hands. It's really hard. So that you put a bunch of those in the giant shaking box, and it shakes the seed pod and the seeds loose, and then it's easier to process the cotton. Yeah. And they still have those cotton gins. Oh, and I didn't tell you, gin is short for engine. It wasn't like somebody was drunk and they said, let's do some with this cotton. It's driving me crazy. And they were drinking gin. It's a cotton engine. The inventor is Eli Whitney. He's also going to be the guy who invents interchangeable parts, which means that you can also make stuff on an assembly line because you can make the same part 100 times and another part 100 times, and then somebody puts them together. That's going to be used primarily. It's like we're talking about Texas today. That's going to be primarily for gun manufacturing. Yeah, during that era. So we got guns and cotton. It is Texas, isn't it? Yeah. All right. Cotton engine makes the spread of cotton to the west more possible because sometimes in the east, the deep south, if it's in a coastal region, they can grow really nice long staple cotton. It's also kind of like the Egyptian cotton, or that My Pillow guy. Have you seen the My Pillow guy? He's got a infomercial all the time, and he really loves Donald Trump in a probably inappropriate way. I mean, it just seems like too much. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying he's got a crush on him. I'm just saying he trusts him a lot. It's my impression because I've seen him talk about Trump. But anyway, he's always like this Giza cotton from Egypt. Yeah, that's that long staple cotton, and it's bigger. It's not giant like that, but it's got the longer strands of cotton. It's a bigger, but it requires more water. And so, there has to be rivers nearby or the ocean. In the United States, they can grow that kind of cotton is along the ocean or in the swampy areas of Louisiana. Swampy areas, but southern because it needs to be warmer as well. But anyway, that cotton's really productive and profitable. The little cruddy, dry weather cotton that we have in West Texas, not as good without the cotton gin. Okay. All right. So, somebody's coming in. I'll check them off. There we go. Okay. So, cotton engine. The reason I'm talking about cotton, because you're going like, why are you talking about cotton? I forgot. I didn't tell you. Is because for the first mills that they make, or the first factories, are going to be textile mills. So those will be electric looms, so power looms, and that you string I don't know how to make cloth. You spin the cotton into thread, and then you weave the thread or string the thread onto the loom, and then you turn on the loom and it weaves it together really tightly and it makes cloth. So textile mills made cloth, and the primary natural resource they used was cotton. So that's how all that's related. So without the cotton gin, that kind of cotton wouldn't have been productive, so we wouldn't have needed factories to make the textiles. It wouldn't have been profitable, but now we've got a whole several states full of this kind of not as cool cotton, but with all this mechanization, they can turn it into pretty decent cloth. And what eventually happens is the mechanically woven cloth is a higher quality than the hand woven cloth because the machine can weave it tighter. So it's not like an open weave. You go like open weave. I don't know. Do you guys buy a lot of cloth? You probably don't. I know. Let me think what open weave. Oh goodness. You ever buy blankets at Market Square and they're all the different colors and stuff, and they're from Mexico? Those are kind of fun and they're kind of warm, but they're a little scratchy. Those are more like a hand woven thing because the the threads are looser, like there's spaces between them. You can poke your finger through them. That's a looser weave. A tighter weave is like your clothes. Yeah, if you can poke your finger between parts of your clothes, they're too old. Or maybe it's weird like the shirt I'm wearing today, it's got lace in it. Most of you guys probably don't wear lace that often. Girls either. I know it's old, it's an old people thing. Your grandma and me. All right, more stuff, sorry. All right, we've talked way too much about fabric. Eli Whitney also invents interchangeable parts. So he's got some pretty important patents, and you're probably thinking that guy has a lot of money because that's always where you guys go. And yeah, he probably did have a lot of money. You're probably right about that. Because of the cotton gin and because textile mills start to develop in the United States, primarily Massachusetts at first, they need to be near running water, flowing water, not like from the faucet, but a river, an ocean. So it helps produce electricity. It's a little paddle wheel and yeah, okay. But anyway, because the cotton becomes so profitable, the South really focuses in on growing cotton and they don't diversify their economy. Or as it says here in my fancy notes, the Southern economy becomes dangerously dependent upon the single cash crop. Dangerously dependent. So if at some point people stop buying their cotton, they've got an enormous problem. I feel like that point is going to happen. I feel like it. All right. At the same time that we're inventing the cotton gin and interchangeable parts, we're also inventing other cool transportation stuff. Now you're going to look at this list of transportation stuff and go like railroad, clearly the coolest thing. I got it, but it's not going to be the most used thing during this era because the stuff you need to make railroads, primarily iron or steel, is very expensive. Very expensive. So, and hard to produce. So until they find a cheaper and better way to produce iron or steel, it's an element, so you can't really produce it. You got to find it, and you have to turn it into something. You got to melt it, turn it into something useful. And they tended to like superheat it to purify it, but to get something that hot is also unusual and expensive. That process is expensive. And then steel is an alloy. You're going like, yeah, I don't care. I already have that. You talk about that in chemistry class, probably. I don't, maybe physics, but probably chemistry. So an alloy is a combination of different elements that usually make something stronger, something better. Yeah. And steel is better, but steel is really hard to produce during this era. So yeah, not too many railroads built during this era because it's really expensive. Yeah. And if you're wondering, like, did they build a lot of canals and roads? No, they didn't build a lot of those either. Steamboat travel, that's part of why I highlighted it. Steamboat travel is going to be, or steamship travel or boat, is going to be probably the most important transportation in this era overall. Later it'll be railroad, and then eventually it'll be roads once we pave roads and have cars and stuff. Canals are important though. We'll start off with canals. We'll just go in order. Sorry. Canals. So canals, a canal is a big ditch that connects two bodies of water. Very technical definition there. If you're wondering how big of a ditch is it, it's got to be big enough ditch that a steamship can go across it. So you can't dig this with your friends, you know. You're going to have a mechanized shovel or something, you know, like a steam shovel or a, what is the I don't know, a bulldozer or something like that. But they don't really have those. But it's really a steam-powered shovel that they'll have. So canal is going to connect two large bodies of water, and that way the ships can go between the two bodies of water. These are really expensive and hard to build, and they require you to have two large bodies of water that are important for commerce that are near each other. In the United States, probably the one canal you need to remember is the Erie Canal. Erie. It's not scary. That's two E's. E-E-R-I-E. But Erie Canal as in Lake Erie, as in New York, that area. Okay. Because they're expensive, usually individuals don't build canals. So this is financed by the state of New York. Yes, state of New York. And it connects Lake Erie and the Hudson River. And that enhances the New York City area as an important center of trade and commerce. It was already an important center of finance. So it's going to make New York City even more important than it already was. Plus they'll have Broadway and Times Square. Probably didn't have Broadway or Times Square back then. But really, they had Wall Street. Yeah, it was important. Trade, always important. We love money. God bless the United States. All right, so New York City, really important because of the Erie Canal. They have canals other places too. I know some of you go like, yeah, Panama Canal, that's later. That's a big one and really important. But later, that happens early 1900s. I think the big canal, the other large canal they had was it's along the Ohio River. I really should remember the name of it because I've actually been on it. Was one of our weird field trips when I was grading AP exams, not in the middle of grading, but in the evening, you know what I'm saying. And it's on the Ohio River and it connects it from Kentucky to the state of Ohio. So it's really interesting. And to say that it's a giant ditch that connects canals, or connects bodies of water, you know, that's just oversimplification. It is that, but it also has a series of locks and channels. So like you go into a segment or a section of a canal and you kind of wait there and then they close some gates and open some other gates and some water flows in and then you sail down that section. Then you get to the next section, you stop, close some gates, open some gates, water flows in. I assume that you guys don't hang out in canals, do you? Some of you are fancy, maybe you traveled through the Panama Canal, but yeah, there aren't any canals. I don't think there's any canals in Texas. I don't know. Anyway, they're expensive, as you might imagine. They are. So there aren't very many. Typically, states pay for them. Individuals can't afford them. Maintenance is kind of expensive as well. Certainly, the building is expensive, but really important in the Kentucky, Ohio area. I think Indiana's right over there too, isn't it? And New York state and city kind of thing. And it connects it to the Great Lakes. So that's a big deal. All right. So it's I can't speak. They call this era sometimes a canal boom, B-O-O-M, like explosion. But there's not that many canals because they're expensive. Yeah. Okay. We're going to build more roads during this time period. They build the National Road, and you probably aren't going to be very impressed with the National Road because the National Road goes from Pennsylvania to Virginia, and those states are already right next to each other. So it's not very national. They'll expand it a little bit later, so to go to Maryland, which is also right next to it. So, probably the road from here to San Antonio is as long. But, it's 3 states are close together. It really helps for commerce, that sort of thing. They call it a national road because it's built with federal money. There's talk of extending it, but then some states think it's not fair because they know the national road will never get to their state, which no kidding. So we're not really in the mood to build national projects during this time period. So we don't extend the national road very far. Okay, and I completely skipped over railroads and steamboats. I'm sorry. I said I was going to go in order, but did I? No. All right, railroads, you know what those are. You don't need water. As a matter of fact, it's better if you don't have it. So a flat area would be useful. So you just build some tracks, put a train on there. I know you have to make the train. The trains are typically, at least the engine, usually made out of iron as well. The metal parts, the rails are going to need to be made out of iron. So you've got to have a lot of iron. And problem with iron, I'm a huge expert on metals, but the problem with iron is it's not very durable. You know this because you live in Texas and you probably had a comal somewhere in your house. You know the big flat iron thing that you heat up the tortillas on. You're going like, no, we have microwaves. Kids, you're missing out. Comal. But what I noticed about that, I have one. I should have brought it over for show and tell, right? But if you heat it too fast, it makes it crack. If you take it, it would hurt. You'd have to use the little hot pad or something. But if you take it from the heat and put it in cold water, it will also crack. It doesn't do well with extreme temperatures. So most of the places where you'd want to connect, like New York and Chicago, New York and Baltimore, they're all in cold places. And iron too kind of changes shape when it gets too hot. So iron, you're going to have to replace the rails pretty regularly. Steel is much better. It's much more durable. It's going to endure the different temperatures better and the extremes of temperatures much better, but it's prohibitively expensive. Do you know what I mean? Prohibitively expensive. It's like if you were here when class was starting and I wasn't recording. It'd be like somebody from the Ozarks going to Harvard. Prohibitively expensive. It would be like a history teacher wanting to buy a Maserati. Prohibitively expensive. I have no idea how much a Maserati is. I assume my annual salary would not pay for it. Yeah. It would be like a history teacher wanting to buy a house in River Place. Prohibitively expensive. You guys don't live in River Place. That's in that other school's territory.
Yeah,
You know
that's in like around 4 Points, right?
Yeah. My niece, her in-laws live in River Place. And their house is not dramatically different than mine as far as size. It's a little bit bigger and it's a little bit newer, but I would suggest they paid more for theirs than I did for mine. I'm certain of it. Plus, there's this country club right next door. It's fancy. All right.
Kind of like Twin Creeks, I guess, for
Yeah,
the Cedar Park area.
I think so. Like Twin Creeks, or like right down the road from me, the Crystal Falls. I don't know if they actually have a Crystal Fall. I need to drive down there and see. I live right there, but it's like a whole other world. I need to go. I did drop a referee off there one time, and I said, "Man, your yard's big. It must take a long time to mow." And he goes, "We have people for that." I went, "Oh well, we have people for that. Very nice. My relatives probably." All right. So railroads expensive. Steamboats not as expensive, oddly enough. There's a picture of a steamboat, like the first or second page of the chapter. Let me look. I know you guys have your books handy too. Let's see. See if I can hold it. Can you see it? Woohoo, picture steamboat. So that is on page 327. And it's just a long, kind of flat boat with most of the storage above the hull. The hull is the bottom part. and it's powered by a paddle wheel steam engine kind of contraption. The bonus of that is you can go both upstream and downstream. This is going to be the primary, most important mode of transportation, especially for goods during this time period. Not for good, but for goods, for stuff that you want to sell and buy. Not uncommon before this era to use rivers to transport goods. Uncommon to go upstream, as you can really row the boat upstream with a whole lot of cargo on it. So this makes upstream commerce as easy as downstream. It's probably a little more expensive because you've got to pay to run the engine, but still much more possible. And this also means that you don't have to go downstream with some stuff, and then upstream you have to go on land because so it's really good. People didn't really travel so much during this era unless you had a lot of money, so there's not a whole lot of traveling. So it's not for people. However, for whatever reason, the steamship was also a popular venue for like a little gambling cruise, maybe just around a river or a lake. And that was trendy during that time period. I cannot say why. They just thought it was trendy. That's what they liked. Gambling. Sounds fun. All right, but steamboats, there are lots of river systems in the United States, and it really enhanced commerce because of the steamship. Robert Fulton is the guy who usually gets credit for the steamship. River systems would be like the Hudson River system, Ohio River system, Mississippi, Missouri. And I know there's some smaller regional river systems that are important as well. Colorado, we know, it's the most important river in Texas, and it goes beyond Texas as well, of course. Roads and bridges, we already talked about the national roads, not quite as national as you might think, but it's funded by the entire nation. And I don't know, do you guys watch the news? Like between classes, you go, I got a break, I'm going to watch the news. I know you did. Me too. So they're about to, our government's about to announce a proposed infrastructure bill, and it's going to include roads and bridges. And one of the things that our politicians will talk about will be the same thing their politicians talked about in that era. Does this national project really benefit the entire country? Is it worth spending federal funds on if it only benefits a few states? For the national road, it benefited Pennsylvania, Virginia, and the surrounding states. So the Deep South is like, no, we don't want to spend any more money on this. And the North, not as excited either. But roads and bridges were built during that time period. The roads are paved with crushed rock during that time period, and it's hard to crush rock. Like, I can't do it. Neither can you, unless you're really in the mood, like a big old sledgehammer or something. Or there could be a Geico commercial about it, I'm sure. But you're going to have a steam hammer kind of thing to crush the rock. So this is going to be expensive. And so we're not going to build very many of them until we get a better system of paving. And there's no real need for that until we have cars. People are going to go west in wagons, that sort of thing, but not on paved roads at all. They'll have trails. And hopefully, because so many wagons go on the trail, it kind of hardens the soil. And you've seen that, like if you jog on a certain path, because I know you guys are all young and healthy, so you go jogging, that sort of thing. But if you walk on trails, that's a little more my speed, walking on a trail. You'll notice where people have walked before as well. All right, roads and bridges, not very national. National road, roads are expensive. Crushed rock, okay. Yeah, that's true. Creating the crushed rock and transporting the crushed rock is expensive. Bridges are typically wooden and covered, and people will charge you a toll. And it seems like this is the era where there's stories where there's a troll that lives near the bridge that collects the toll is pretty trendy, like a little monster that lives under the bridge. And I think that's just because the tolls were expensive. So they sort of extrapolated a bit and made scary kid stories. because everyone always wants to scare their kids. I don't know what's up with that. So the toll roads and bridges were typically privately funded, privately created, occasionally publicly created, but you have tolls even if they're publicly created because you have to pay to maintain them. And you know this if you ever drive on 183A, either on purpose or accidentally. I know when they first opened it, I went on it accidentally, and the bill was very large. It was like 20 bucks, and I'd gone like 5 miles. So then I quickly bought a toll tag because I thought I will accidentally get on 183A again. I'd rather it were cheaper. Yeah. All right. That's why they didn't ever let me teach economics, because that's the extent of my economics talk. That and don't spend more money than you take in. That's all I got. Unless you're buying a house, then you probably don't have any choice. All right. So roads, bridges, private, they're rarely profitable. That's true. They really were rarely profitable because not very many people use them. And the more you charge, probably the less people used them. All right. I'm going to stop for a second just to see if you guys have any questions. I know it's not time to go. Don't get excited or upset or anything. Do you guys have any questions? Is there anything you want to ask just yet? Not.
I have a couple.
All right. We count on you for this. Let's hear it.
Okay. So, wait, hold on. When I was taking notes on the textbook, I wrote down a couple questions.
Oh, look at that.
I'm
Okay.
flexing.
I know. Everyone's impressed.
So, when people traveled past the Appalachian Mountains,
Yes.
they traveled in groups, right?
Yep.
So how big typically were the groups?
Okay, that's a good question that I probably don't have the best answer to, but they would go on a wagon train. So everybody would grab their little Conestoga wagon or their big Conestoga wagon. You needed to have enough gear to last probably 6 or 8 months, probably longer because where you're going, there's no HEB, so you can't buy any stuff. They traveled together so that if the Native Americans whose land they were going to take got angry about it, it would be easier to defend. So usually I would say 15 or 20 wagons was pretty typical, but I don't have a source for that.
Wagon? How big was a wagon?
It's bigger than a Kia Soul. That's all I have to say. Now it's got to be big enough that it can transport half a year's worth of goods. So yeah, I know it's got to have a lot of beans, a lot of rice, whatever it is that you take with you that isn't going to spoil. You're going to hope you can find some water along the way. So they're pretty big. I know that pretty big is not really a good answer. So let me make a note for dimensions. Oh gosh, sorry. I was writing on my little computer pad. I might have muted myself or something. The dimensions of a Conestoga. And that was the typical kind of wagon, Conestoga. And if you had the 8th grade teacher that let you play Oregon Trail,
oh,
and you normally died, those were the wagons you used, and you normally died because you went either by yourself or you got dysentery. Didn't you get dysentery and die a lot? Yeah.
I never played it, but
yeah,
I think I remember hearing kids talk about dysentery.
Yeah, hopefully you never actually got it. You can be cured of it in the modern era, but you would die back in those days. And that's normally from your friend, the mosquito. They're not friendly. Or drinking water that had poop in it.
Yeah, I kind of wonder about, like, when did water become like as pure as we know it?
That's definitely a modern thing, but they understood even then that if you boiled water, you can drink it. We really understand that in Leander because we have boil water notices a lot, and runs out
especially over that ice.
The snowpocalypse. Yeah.
Snowpocalypse.
I was melting snow. Boy, that's the truth. That was
for
fun.
like a week?
For me, it was just like 3 days. It was a fun adventure. I know.
'Cause I go to Orange Theory and Leander on Lakeline.
Oh yeah,
Do you know where, like by the Randalls and
by the Randalls, by Crystal Falls, where there might be
yeah,
an
Crystal
actual.
Falls. And
I know.
have you been to that Brooklyn Heights pizza place over there?
Yes.
Yeah, that near there.
Yeah, I
That's a
feel
good
like place,
by the way.
it is
We're
lovely.
kind of getting off topic.
I
I
was
have one
afraid
more
of.
question.
Yes. Okay. Let's hear it. Okay. Oh my gosh, this is going to be in the evaluation. I can feel it. Okay. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So what's an example of interchangeable parts
Oh,
in factories?
that's mostly for stuff like when you made guns. So like if I couldn't tell you what the parts of a gun were. I know there's a handle, and then there's a trigger, and then there's a place where the bullet comes out. See how good I am? And a barrel. But those were made separately. And then there's somebody at the end who kind of pieces those together. So it's easier. It's easier to piece it all together. But also, if your gun breaks and all you need is the handle, then you can just buy the handle and fix it. So interchangeable parts are really supposed to serve two benefits. One, it's easier to assemble, and two, if a part of it breaks, perhaps you can replace the part rather than the entire thing. I don't know if that helps, but it's used a lot.
Yeah, that does.
Okay, good. In machines and gun manufacturing.
And what was the machine called that Eli Whitney and sort of invented?
Oh, the cotton.
He was with one other guy.
Yeah, cotton gin, G-I-N, short for engine.
Oh, I thought it was something else that did the interchangeable parts.
Yeah, I don't know. He usually is given credit for interchangeable parts as well. But yeah, there was somebody else with him. But yeah, those are two big things for Eli.
I think Samuel
Slater. Yeah. Crud, was he?
Spinning Jenny.
Yeah, Spinning Jenny, that's right. Yep. And
is that the interchangeable parts one?
No, that's how you made the thread that you put on the loom with the, and I think he was part of the power loom as well.
Okay.
All right. Sorry, I didn't remember all the inventors there. All right. Are we good? Anybody else have a question? Want to talk about restaurants? All right, we're going back to the notes. Okay, but I'm sure those people at Brooklyn Heights would be glad that you gave them a commercial right in the middle of class. So there you go.
Yeah, and then they'll be in our recordings too.
That's right. So you can go show them that and say, like, can I get a free pizza out of this? All right.
Commercial.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Why would people go west during this time period? Land. That's primarily it. Because there's not anything else in the West unless you just want to meet some natives, and you probably didn't. So part of the reason they're able to go west is we're starting to clear the land during this era. They'd already started talking about Indian removal in the Jefferson administration, the idea of the one big reservation, that everything east of the Mississippi should belong to Americans. Those would be white people. And then everything west of the Mississippi should belong to Native Americans. Of course, they would have said Indians during that time period. And if you're wondering, like, why the division? Well, because they didn't think there was anything good west of the Mississippi River. So it's like, all the good land is over here, so let's give all the crappy land to Native Americans. And you'll notice that we'll kind of continue that tradition, honestly, in some ways, even until today, because if you look at the land where reservations are, it's usually not really fertile farmland, and it's usually not an area that is desirable for consumers, like people who are going to buy land. That could be an overstatement. It's probably not. It's part of the reason that Native Americans got Oklahoma. No offense if you're from there, but you can't grow stuff there. It's a bunch of clay. You can grow some stuff in northern Oklahoma, I know that, but usually it's the worst land. Or like I lived in Arizona my junior year of high school, and um, the reservations there are typically in the desert, and nobody really wants the desert. They don't call the Badlands in the Dakota the Badlands because they're good places to grow things. So lots of the places that we end up forcing Native Americans to live on are usually, in some ways, we don't think they're good land. Later on, sometimes they'll discover gold or silver or oil, and then it turns out better than they expected, but that's not intentional at all. So the thought is, if you push Native Americans west of the Mississippi, that opens up that really nice fertile farmland, kind of Ohio Valley and south, where lots of corn and stuff is grown in the modern era. So Midwest, what we think of as the Midwest, west of the Mississippi, is thought of as the great American desert during that time period, because no one had really documented what went on there, and nobody lived there and grew stuff. I know there were Plains Indians there and they hunted buffalo, but that's really about all that was going on there. Buffalo and deer, and very sparsely populated tribes of Native Americans lived there. With the Indian Removal Act during the Jackson administration, it will push more Native Americans to the west. That happens in the 1830s, if you're keeping track of time there. So we started talking about Indian removal as early as the Jefferson administration. You'll start to see more and more push for that by the 1830s. And that'll clear paths for land a little farther west. And then, of course, once they discover gold in the 1840s in the West, we've got to revise our idea of where Native Americans should live. And we'll continually revise that for at least another 60, 80 years. All right, so you're going west for land. I often would have students say, well, why do poor people just stay in the East then if you could essentially get free land in the West? And you guys have already brought up, some of the points about that. You had to have enough money to buy a nice big wagon and fill it with 6 months of supplies. Now, if I had to pay 6 months of bills ahead of time right now, ooh, that would be a little bit of a stretch for me, and I am not technically poor. I'm not poor at all. I don't mean it that way at all. I'm not. But I am middle class. I'm a middle class person, and I could not afford 6 months of provisions up front, rent and utilities and all that kind of stuff. I recognize they weren't paying rent, but to have 6 months of food all at one time would be a difficult task for a poor person. And to buy a wagon would be a difficult task for a poor person. So you would have to have enough money to live on for 6, 8 months, a year. By the time you planted a crop and harvested it, it's going to be at least a year. So you've got to have a year's worth of savings for this to work out. And most people didn't. So going west is expensive. So even if the land is free, the trip is not, if that makes sense. Okay. And before we go, we got to mention immigration. During this time period, about 4 million immigrants. That's a lot of people. 4 million, it's a lot. Most of them, 75%, probably from Ireland. And you remember from your world history class, this is the era of the Great Potato Famine. It's not great because we enjoyed it. It's great because it was big. So Ireland has this potato famine. It's essentially a nation of tenant farmers. There's a handful of people that own the land. They rent it out to poor Irish dudes who grow potatoes and then sell them. And when the potato blight occurs, it's some sort of bug that sort of hollows out the potato. So it makes like instant potatoes, only not really. So when they harvested them, they kind of collapsed and they were poofy, and you couldn't use it. So everybody who's a tenant farmer pretty much goes broke. The trip over to the United States is pretty cheap. Sometimes potential employers will pay for the cheap trip, and then you work for them You have to agree to work for them for a certain amount of time. It's not exactly like being an indentured servant, but it's, I guess, like a slightly modern version of it. And your indenture is definitely not 3 to 7 years, but it's long enough to pay off the passage. You could also buy a steerage rate, which meant you hung out with the luggage. And that was typically how Irish dudes came over. When the Irish folks come over, they're not coming over to grow potatoes anymore. They're going to work in factories, and they primarily emigrate to cities. So this will lead to urbanization and the problems that come with urbanization. Another million immigrants will come from Germany during this time period because Germany is kind of restructuring. They're going from city state to more of a national government. And it means that in some regions, some of the people who used to be prominent and own a lot of stuff are about to lose it. So it's like, hey, let's take the money and run. So a lot of the German immigrants who come over with money and education, maybe skill as well. They're more likely to come over and buy a farm or start a business in a city. The immigrants from Ireland, more likely to be Catholic. The immigrants from Germany, more likely to be Lutheran, a German Protestant denomination. And some of you are like, I know what Lutheran is, but just in case, you know, that's why I'm here. All right, and they are more likely to live in the country. Also, a little bit later, you'll get the German groups immigrating to places like Texas, like New Braunfels or Fredericksburg, or even where I went for spring break. Don't get jealous. LaGrange. LaGrange. You ever been to LaGrange? My college roommate wanted to go to LaGrange, and I'll tell you why, and now you're all going to want to go. She wanted to go see the Texas Quilt Museum. There you go. My college roommate's from Iowa. She likes to make quilts. Yep. And
Did you
even
have fun? Did you have fun?
You know, it was interesting. Yeah, it was interesting. I don't know that we need to record this part because you guys could find her and show it to her. But she's a little different, and she wanted to go to the quilt museum, but it was $10 a piece, and she thought it was too expensive. So I have a better job, so I paid for the ticket. You know, I'm a college teacher, and she teaches at a public school. Actually, public school pays better than ACC. No offense, ACC, but it does. And then she met some people on the internet that she wanted to meet in person. So it could have been, you know, I could have made the news, but I didn't. So it was good. It all turned out fine. We saw some quilts and met some strangers. That was okay. So hopefully your spring break was equally as exciting. All right. I know it's kind of sad, but it's almost time to go. It is kind of sad, isn't it? But so next time, we're going to talk a lot about the weekly question next time. So if you feel like you were cheated out of your weekly question talk, it's coming, I promise. And if you're ready to get started, you don't need me. I'll look at page 340 to 347. Now, before we go, let me go ahead and stop the recording.